Welcome back in, everybody. Another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Parker Gabriel here, Ryan McFadden over there. Denver Post, Broncos beat reporters coming to you. It's Wednesday evening, a little later in the week than we normally do this. But, Ryan, it was Monday Night Football, and it was obviously a wild game, long trip back, not quite as long as it took the team to get back. But we'll get into all of that, and it was a win against the Buffalo Bills for a third straight victory. Season feels a lot different than it did just a few weeks ago. Broncos were 1-5, now they're 4-5. So Ryan, what? I guess first things first. How surprised were you? I know you weren't that surprised since you were the only member of the Denver Post sports staff to pick the Broncos to beat Buffalo last week earlier. This week.
Honestly, I'm not surprised. Like I'm gonna. With this, when I made that prediction, I wasn't trying to play around. I really thought the Broncos could win simply because of I've just been so confident in the way the defense has played in recent weeks, and I felt like, all right, if the Broncos can get a couple turnovers off the Bills, I think they have a shot. They can pull it off, and we saw that there. 4 takeaways, 2 picks from Josh Allen, and that was one of the big difference makers in that game. So yeah, when I made that prediction, I said, you know what, I'm going to swing big. I like that Chiefs game and what they did to Patrick Mahomes. I said, man, I feel like after that game, I kind of had that confidence. Like if they're able to if they can force Josh Allen to make some mistakes, I think they can pull it off, and that's what happened. So yeah, I'm not too surprised how the game played out. It's funny, I was close on the score too. 20.
You were, yeah, you nailed
20,
it.
I predicted 23-20. The final score was 24-22. So I'm proud of that one.
Probably would have been even closer to spot on had the Broncos not messed up a couple of extra points. It could have changed the math there at the end of the game. We'll get into that in just a minute. It's interesting, Ryan, because I picked Denver to lose. I was curious to see how they would come off the bye week, right? When they had the extra week of preparation and you win 2 straight going into the bye week. I knew they were feeling good. You could sort of tell at practice and in the locker room, sort of in the lead up when they came back from the bye week that, the good vibes were still there. And then, they come out and Jaquan McMillan forces that fumble on the first play of the game. I thought it really set a tone. They forced takeaways on Buffalo's first 2 possessions. They didn't really capitalize on them offensively. I mean, they ended up with 6 points off the 4 turnovers. But the defense making that statement so early, the fumble, and then the Justin Simmons pick on a bad drop by Gabe Davis in the red zone really set the tone of the last 3 weeks going into the bye week weren't a fluke. And that really carried the day, going forward against Buffalo.
Yeah, I think these 2 wins against Kansas City and Buffalo against Buffalo is I think for Denver is showing this is not a fluke. We're here to make a run. They have played some really strong defense, and you gotta give credit to Russell Wilson on Monday night as well. He wasn't throwing the ball for 300 yards. I believe this is the 5th straight game where he threw for under 200 yards. But the way he was able to improvise and get out the pocket, escape pressure, flip those passes to Samaje Perine, the probably one of the craziest passes I've seen to Cortland Sutton in the red zone for a touchdown. It's just that that's vintage Russ. Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah, from a passing number standpoint, yeah, it wasn't 300 yards, but when he's able to move around the pocket. Sense that pressure, get away from it. That's like the guy you saw back in Seattle, and that's gonna be important moving forward. But no, these 2 wins are huge, and that Kansas City Chiefs game, that was a very dominating win. So the question was coming out the bye week, can they keep this up? And they showed that they can. And granted, Buffalo is they're 5-5, so they're not living to the expectations a lot of people have had for them going into the season, but that's still a really good football team with one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So and then not to top it off, it was on the road, so it wasn't even at home. It was on the road in Buffalo, tough place to play. They was able to pull off that win. Defense continues to look solid. So yeah, they're riding some momentum, and it's gonna be. It kind of changes how the season looks as well, because when you look at the rest of the schedule. I think they they're going to be competitive in a lot of these games moving forward if the defense continues to play the way that they're playing.
Yeah, no doubt, and that it's going to be interesting. We'll set up sort of the next couple of weeks because I think it's two winnable games, but not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. It's crazy, Ryan. Like the way we've just like, you've seen some stuff here. First season on the beat, it's been pretty wild. Like one of the things that is hard to fathom. Aaron Schatz, who was part of the Football Outsiders, Creative Football Outsiders, and now is at FTN. He had this tweet yesterday. He's the guy who developed, DVOA, and weeks 1 through 5, the Broncos defense was one of the worst ever tracked. When you go back and put DVOA to, historical defenses, and then weeks 6 through 10, they've been the number 9 unit in the NFL. So they went from literally being on a track of being, we all saw it with our own eyes, first 4 or 5 weeks, historically bad, to now being like one of the better units in the NFL over the last 5 weeks. So it's really been remarkable. There's a lot of reasons for it. It's not just, one thing or another thing, but they've put it together. And then sort of like you said, it's going to be interesting with Russell, like I thought he played really well. And when you look around the country, it's always interesting on a game like a Monday Night Football game. There's a lot more eyeballs on it. And you saw a lot, whether it was on social media or with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman on the broadcast, a lot of love for Russ and the way he played and, making plays in winning time and all of that. And yet, there's a lot of stuff to clean up too. You had, maybe a couple misses in the passing game where they could have had big shots down the field. Obviously, the sacks are still the main thing. He's been sacked 30 times. And you're just, he didn't turn the ball over, which is terrific. Like if they play turnover-free football, like you said, I guess I'd add that to, the defense is going to have them in a lot of games down the stretch. If they play the kind of defense they're playing right now and they don't turn the ball over, they're going to probably be in every game they play the rest of the way. So, when you've got Russell Wilson, 29 pass attempts, he got sacked the 4 times, and then he had 9 rushing attempts too, to not put the ball on the ground, to not give it to the other team. Like that's really sort of the recipe at this point, which is wild because, Russ wants to chuck it around and try to make big plays in the passing game. Sean Payton is just itching to play really aggressive and go for the throat and all of that. And yet the last few weeks, they've found that the key to not necessarily playing dynamic offense, but to winning football games is to play really conservative offensively, run the football a lot and put the premium on, not turning the ball over and not getting too far behind the chains. So it's not the sexiest recipe in the world, but it's working for Denver right now.
Yeah, I think after the hole the Broncos dig themselves into early in the season, I think you kind of like trying to find the sexiest way to play football. I think that's thrown out the window. You just got to win. You just got to win games.
Yep.
The Broncos are trying to, they're trying to make up ground, and they found it. Sticking to the running game, let Russ be conservative, and it has worked so far. I think, and you mentioned the point. If they can continue to avoid committing turnovers, mixed with the defense playing the way they have, they're going to be very competitive. And it's going to be interesting to see how this rest of the season plays out because we really went from it's crazy. We went from everyone hoping this team just continues to lose to get a top 2 pick in the draft. But now it's like, oh shoot, this we could really be in this after the we could be in the playoff picture. Like it's a realistic chance that this team could literally go from being 1-5 to a game over 500 after the Cleveland Browns game. Now, like they got to get through Minnesota first, but that's a realistic.
Yep.
That seems very realistic at this point, and that changes your season. I think where a lot of people say, "Hey, maybe they should, sail." If I think maybe we were wrong. Maybe that was the wrong idea. Maybe Sean Payton was right that they do have the talent to win, and so far they've proven it during this win streak.
Yeah, no doubt. And so that's kind of the, they've won 3 straight. They made a call to sort of hold firm, and it's not like they didn't listen, they didn't get the price they wanted, but they put a high price tag on some of their guys at the deadline and said, hey, if we get blown away, we'll make a deal. And if not, we're going to see what we can do with this group. And, the returns on that so far, you come out of the bye week and beat Buffalo. Obviously, that's a good start. It is interesting, Ryan. Like, I feel like obviously the tenor is always a little different if you win. Like, there's no, Will Lutz said this in the locker room after the game. There's no such thing as an ugly win in the NFL. Like, you win or you lose, except for obviously the rare instance where it's a tie. But the thing is, the way that game ended, there's just a massive gulf between what the feeling would have been coming out of it, with a win compared to if Buffalo would have had 11 guys on the field when Lutz missed the 41-yarder at the end, in part because of the end of the game. And Sean Payton has said very categorically that they handled that situation right, that he wouldn't have done it a different way if he was doing it again. He didn't want to leave Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs time at the end if they had kicked the field goal with 25 seconds left, I think there was on the clock. And so all of that, like, you take all that and that's all fine. But had they played that game the way they did, where the defense turned them over 4 times, they're +3 in the turnover department. They only score 6 points off those turnovers. And then they fire drill field goal at the end and miss it and lose. It would have been, I feel like you can't overstate how different, the tone would have been. And some of that gets to, what Sean said when you were on the conference call with him on Tuesday, Ryan, of just like, great win, no doubt about it. That's all that matters in the NFL at the end of the day. And also, especially on offense, like, they have a lot that they need to get better at and improve. And given where we're at in the season, like, it needs to happen relatively quickly if they're going to take this, 3-game win streak and run it out to, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, there's this win streak, is big for momentum. They're showing encouraging side, but especially on the offensive side of the ball, there's still a lot more to work on. It's not a finished product. Even Sean Payton admitted it himself. They're not at their sweet spot. I feel like, you're still at the point where I feel like there's times where, Russell Wilson is missing, guys down the field, whether it's because, he's holding the ball too long. I think he had a couple plays on Monday night where if he would let that ball go, he would have had a pretty big play. Pass protection could still be cleaned up a little bit more. And then, but to me, you still want to find some consistency with your wide receivers as well. Yeah. Even though Cortland Sutton has solid games, but these guys, Marvin Mims still the only wideout to have 100 yards receiving in a game this year. So there's still a lot of things. And then go back to the tight ends, just trying to figure out, what to do with your tight ends in the passing game. And which, not having Greg Dulcich out there does hurt them. So Sean Payton's going to have to figure out as well. So there's a lot. Like, Denver's offense is not perfect. But they're figuring out a way to win. And there's still a lot that they need to fix. So yeah, like, and Sean Payton admitted that they have not found their sweet spot yet. And you can tell even during the swing streak, you can tell they have not yet found that sweet spot that they're looking for.
Yeah, no doubt. And so it's interesting because, like, they've been good running the football, but they haven't hit the home run, right? Like, they created a ton of explosives in the run game early in the season. They're still doing it at a good rate, but longest run play on Monday against Buffalo was 11 yards. It's kind of like they've kind of just been, churning it out. And so that, and they've benefited from all of the takeaways, 9 of them in the last 2 weeks. And then also what Marvin Mims has done in the return game was the AFC Special Teams Player of the Week this week. And he's in one of those modes where it's like every time he touches the ball on a punt return or a kick return, something good happens. I charted him earlier today, and the last 3 times, he's returned a punt. It's gone for 31, 17, and 27. It's set up 3 of the 5 touchdowns they scored against Kansas City and Buffalo and wins. I mean, he's just, he's changing the game. They call it hidden yardage or whatever, but, like, it's not hidden. You see it and you feel it, and it makes a big difference for the Broncos. And so, like, I think you can look at this 2 ways, right, Ryan? Like, it's either man, they're getting by the skin of their teeth, and the offense is it's gonna cost them at some point. Or it's like, listen, the defense and special teams at this point are basically floating the offense, and the offense hasn't been terrible. We saw like truly terrible offense last year. It hasn't been like that, but like you're sort of floating the offenses to see if they can get in some kind of rhythm, and you're winning games while you're doing that. And so, it feels like to me, it's not a team I fully sort of like trust yet, if that's the right way to put it. Like, I still think that they have enough to prove that I'm a little bit leery about thinking that they're going to really like rip off, 3 or 4 more in a row, or just like basically get to 10 wins, call it. But at the same time, they've also played well enough for a long enough stretch that you sort of feel like if the offense finds a little bit more consistency, a little bit more explosiveness, that they've got a chance to do that at least. And that's a lot more than you would have said a month ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit the points there. It's like I'm not at the point where I feel like this team is going to just go on a crazy streak where we're looking at 10, 11 victories. I am nowhere near that. But for Denver, they're in a better position where they're winning games and they can still, while trying to figure out where can we find this consistency on offense. So I think they're in if I was the Broncos, I'd rather be winning games than being that figure out mode than trying to continue to say, yeah, we're still figuring it out while losing X amount of games. So I still think they're in a good spot. But yeah, if they find a little bit more explosiveness, if Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy can have a game where they go for 80 plus, maybe a little bit over 100 yards receiving. Javonte Williams finally crosses the 100-yard rushing mark. I don't know. Like then then they're going to do something that I didn't think was even possible.
Yeah.
When this season started, and like even though they've done so well, like you still have to look back and like, man, if they would have just beat the Raiders in week 1, handle business against the Commanders in week 2.
Yep.
Like this, like you're looking at a whole different season for this team. But yeah, I'm with you there. I'm not completely sold on this offense being able to like reel off 4 more wins, but if they can start finding if they can continue to build on what they have developed, man, I think we're in for I think we're in for a wild ride down the stretch.
Yep, no doubt. I mean, it's exactly what you say about one game. I mean, I think the Raiders and the Jets in week 5 hurt in particular because they're AFC games. But conference record can matter in the postseason conversation when it comes down to wild cards. But the Commanders is just as egregious given that they led that game 21-3, and you're going to keep looking back at those first 2 home games, or just the fact that they led all 3 of those home games weeks 1, 2, and 5 at halftime and lost all 3 of them, and think, what could have been. I mean, it's kind of funny because the only 2 teams in the AFC still that have a worse record than Denver are Tennessee and New England. They're tied for 12th with the Chargers and the Jets. You've got obviously 2 games against the Chargers and another one against the Raiders still left on the schedule. But Ryan, I mean, if you flip one game 5-4, then like they would literally be tied. 5-4 would be tied with Houston and Cincinnati for the last postseason spot. So like there's so much shaking out to be done. And that's why the odds still say, I think it's floating around 10% or 11% for a postseason berth, but you're in it. That's the thing. Like you can look at it and say we're in it. And certainly the Broncos players would tell you they don't care about 10%. It's just like, just take care of business, as many weeks in a row as you can and see where the chips fall. So it's very interesting. This is sort of the way the NFL is, and it's certainly the position the Broncos are in right now. You can look at it and say there's only 2 teams in the AFC that have a worse record than them. You can look at it and say they're 1 game out of the final playoff spot. Both are true. Same with, if we want to look ahead for a couple minutes, I think it's the same exact thing with Minnesota and Cleveland, 2 home games coming up. You can look at it and say you're facing Josh Dobbs and either Dorian Thompson-Robinson or PJ Walker as the quarterback the next 2 weeks after you've just beat Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Or you can look at it and say Minnesota's won 5 in a row and Cleveland's got probably the best defense in the NFL. So it's 2 games where it's like, should Denver look at them and say like, yeah, we can get those 2 and get to 6-5 and make that a really big game in Houston at the start of a 3-game road trip? Absolutely. No reason why that can't be the case. But also, like, there's no way either is a gimme or a game where you sort of say like, oh, well, Denver they don't have to play their best and they'll be fine. Like it's to that point in the season now where they're going to have the P's and Q's tightened up and if they play really well, they can get both those games, and bad habits that pop up are also likely to cost you one of them.
Yeah, it's these next 2 games are, you want to have when it comes to the next 2 games, you don't want to be in a situation like I was telling you, like when we saw in the first 2 games of the year, where they have a lead and boom, they fall apart. Like these are teams that, but when you look at the Vikings and the Browns, they can go 2 ways. Like you said, even though they're playing against 2 backup quarterbacks, but Josh Dobbs has been playing pretty solid since he got to Minnesota. They're on a 5-game win streak, so they have a lot of momentum going on with them. And then you look at the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, they got Dorian Thompson-Robinson, or it's going to be PJ Walker, but that defense is really good.
Yep,
that's really a really good defense. And I think when you look ahead, let's look at that Browns game in particular. That's one game. Russell Wilson and the offense has done a really good job in trying to limit the turnovers. That is one game where you really don't want to have a turnover in that game. I feel like the way Denver's defense is playing, I think they're going to. I think they should be. I look at them as favorites going into these next 2 games, just because the way the defense is playing in particular. But yeah, I think these are the type of games where you really want to have everything cleaned up, all the details tightened up, because you can't let these slip away. And I feel like it's like if you let these type of games, these next 2 weeks slip away against the Vikings and the Browns at home, that I think all that momentum you just built off of beating the Bills and beating the Chiefs just goes out the window to me.
Yeah, no doubt. And for the reason we already talked about, I mean, the Minnesota game, it's obviously critical. I mean, it's in prime time. You gotta you have at the most 2 losses, left probably, if you're realistically talking about making the playoffs in the AFC this year. They're out of 10 instances in the previous 2 seasons. 9 and 8 has made it 3 times. But just look now. I mean, you've got 6 teams in the AFC right now are 6-3 or better. And then, Houston's playing well. CJ Stroud's playing great. We'll talk more about him in the coming weeks, obviously. And then the Bengals are one of those 5-4 teams, and they started slow as Joe Burrow got healthy. So you just look at the number of teams, and obviously they're gonna, teams are going to play each other, they're going to beat each other up. The Broncos have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games against AFC teams that are sort of like between them and the playoff picture left on the schedule. So that's good news for them. But that also just means like the margin for error, it just doesn't really exist, And so obviously if you look at the next 2, like Minnesota, you want to get that one. They're 2.5-point favorites at the midpoint of the week here. Denver is. Cleveland's the really critical one just because it's an AFC team and it's a team that's in the playoff conversation. So, like if you were talking about a split and you're a Broncos fan, you'd want it to be lose to Minnesota and beat Cleveland. But obviously, like if you're talking about getting really, really hot and trying to get back in the picture, then, both is obviously ideal. Don't need to be, Chris Berman to figure that one out. So it's, so it's going to be interesting. They've certainly changed the conversation around this team over the past 3 weeks. All right, Ryan, 2.5-point favorite, prime time, Sunday night, a beat writer's dream, late start at the stadium. Who you got, Broncos or Vikings?
I'm gonna continue to roll with the Broncos. I got the Broncos beating the Vikings 27-24.
Yeah, I'm I picked Broncos too. I mean, it's close, right? Like Minnesota's won 5 in a row. Danielle Hunter is a really good edge rusher. He's got one of the best safeties, potential, future Hall of Fame guy in Harrison Smith. And maybe Justin Jefferson will be back. We'll see. Obviously, it's Wednesday evening as we're recording this. We'll see what Justin Jefferson's status is going forward. But Jordan Addison's played really well. They've got some options. And Josh Dobbs, who's a literal, rocket scientist, is playing quarterback. He's only been there a couple weeks. At some point, maybe that starts to catch up with them as teams sort of scout what he's doing. But so far, he's played really well. They've won both the games that he's played in. Interestingly, they opened the 21-day window for Nick Mullins too, another quarterback on the roster who's hurt. So I don't know if it's up in the air for Sunday, but up in the air quarterback situation, sort of just like in a broader sense since Kirk Cousins ruptures Achilles. So yeah, I'm taking Denver 23-20. And listen, if they get back to 500, then it'll just kind of be even more interesting next week than it is this week, but plenty interesting now. We'll have you covered on all of it going forward. denverpost.com/Broncos. That's Ryan McFadden. I'm Parker Gabriel. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you check out all of the latest coverage at the website, and we will talk to you all next week.